Hey, welcome to this new lecture, and I hope you had an easy time trying to build the geocoding app. I know that should have been tough, but if you have gone through a certain point, then that's great too. In this lecture now, you'll get two things. The first thing is you'll find the attachment in the resources of this lecture. There you'll find all the files that contain the code for this web app. Specifically, you'll find four directories, so static, templates, uploads, and virtual, and also an app.py file. Now here I happen to have four app files, but basically the last one is the final version. So this is very basic, the version 1, where I just add a couple of functions in a Python script, and then I added some more to these functions, and then some more, and then I eventually added some more code that completed the application. So this is what you get. And you'll find this in a zip file. So please download that. Yeah, that's the first thing you'll get in this lecture, the zip file of the solution code. And the second thing is, I'll go ahead now and explain how I approach this problem. And I'll show you the code and what I built first and second and third and so on. So these are the four versions. I have version 1 when I added some code, 2, 3, and 4. So let's ignore this for a moment, because the first thing I want to explain is the user interface. So we'll start from the front end first. Now the first thing I did though was creating a directory structure. So I created an empty static folder, templates and uploads and virtual. So static and templates are standard for a Flask application, and the uploads folder will be just a folder where I generate these intermediate files that the application makes available for download for the users. You'll see that in just a bit. I also created this virtual folder there, which is actually the directory of the virtual environment. So I made that with Python, with the env flag, virtual env, and virtual for the name of the directory. So if you execute that, you'll get this virtual directory with a fresh installation of Python and pip and other built-in libraries. And then I went ahead and installed Flask, and I installed pandas, because you will need pandas to read the data that the user is submitting, and you want to calculate some columns there, and you also need Geopy to geocode those values from the pandas data frame. And yeah, those are the three third-party libraries that you need to install. And once I created these empty directories, then the second step was to create the user interface. So what I did was I created an index.html template in the templates folder. So at first that was quite simple. So it didn't contain this much code. That simply contained like a title and some headings there, and also a basic form. And initially I didn't put anything in the action. So when the user submits, I had this submit button, and I also had this file type of input in there. So if you can remember it, file. This is the form, we have this file input and the submit button. So these two, and I also restricted file submission to CSV only. And yeah, that's the form. I didn't have this in the beginning, so I won't go and explain this for now. I'll go through this later. And yeah, that was the interface. Later I went and created this main.css file. So here you'll find the CSS styling for the web page. I won't go into this now. This is quite self-explanatory. So we have done CSS earlier in the course, and this file is also included in the resources among the other files. But I never expect that you have the same styling. So you may have some different things, some colors or sizings and so on. And then you go ahead and reference the CSS file to these head tags. Yeah, basically that's what I did in that second step. So first step, creating a directory, and second step, creating the basic interface and adding the CSS styling to that. if you simply created the HTML code and then later when you finish your application you created a CSS file, that's perfectly okay too. Or even if you started with a Python file directly, that's also fine. Some developers start from the front end and some start from the back end. That's perfectly okay. So yeah, once I had the interface, then I went ahead and created an app file. So an app.py file. These 4 versions are just for demonstration for this video. So I made it 4 different files to show you the stages that I went through to build my final code. So version 1, this is what I did basically. I imported these libraries. So from Flask, I imported the usual Flask class and normally a render template method to return HTML templates. And I knew that my application involved some user submission, so some post requests. Therefore, I included the request method there as well, and then the send file method, which is used to send a file to the browser for downloading. And yeah, that's about Flask, and then we wanted to geocode data, right? So I uploaded from Geopy geocoders, I imported Nominatim, and also pandas. And once I imported the dependencies, then I went ahead and created a Flask instance, just here, and then 3 functions, which for now they don't do anything. So the first would be the home page, as you see here with this backslash, and I name that index, the function, and I simply return render template. And of course here goes index.html. So this will render the home page, which is index.html. And then the next thing that you might expect is, the user is in your web page, and once the user presses the choose file button and they select a file and then they press submit, what you want to do when they press the submit button is you want now to load that file in Python, and you want to read that as a pandas data frame, and you want to calculate a coordinates column where you calculate the latitude and longitude from the address column using Geopy. And then out of the coordinates column you want to calculate latitude and longitude. So we have done this previously in the course in the pandas section. And then eventually you want to return a data frame, and you want to send that data frame via a render template method. You want to send that data frame here, down here. So what we're talking here is we're talking about creating a function that does all this. So it reads the CSV file and processes it with pandas, and then it displays the table, the data frame as a table. And I created such a function and called it success table. If you remember, that has to have this method's parameter equal to post, because we are expecting a post request. And then we have yet another function. I call this download file. So that's the URL, success-table, and this is a function name. That we have yet another URL and another function attached to that URL. So I call this download. Again, as I said, every time the user does something, you want to create a decorator and a function attached to that. So first the user will do a submission, and you want to capture that in this function, a success table, and then the next thing that the user will do is it will press the download button that will be displayed down here, and that has to trigger another function in Python, and that has to trigger the send file method in Python, so that we send the file to the user. That means we need another function here called download. At least that's how I named it. And yeah, let's go to version 2 now. So see the difference here and here. The index function remains the same, so that's all we do for index. It's quite simple. We simply return the initial index.html template. And then here I've added quite a lot of code. And basically what we have is we check for the request. If we got a post request, then I get the file using requests.files, and file here is the name of the input in here. So yeah, what happens is that when the user presses the submit button, this one here, a URL is triggered, and then that URL is URL for the success underscore table function. So this function here, that means this function will be executed, and then we create a data frame there, which will read the file, this file that we're getting from the user form. And then we do this Nominatim, and we create a data frame column there. You know this from the pandas section. We use the apply method and then apply the geocode to the address column. And then out of the coordinates column, I get a latitude column, and I use a lambda function to extract the latitude from each of the coordinates rows, and also count for non-values there. And then I don't need this coordinates column, so I just drop that using the drop method. And then I convert this to a CSV. So here I'm generating a CSV file. This is the output that we want to give to the user. And I'm storing this in the uploads folder, so you just need to pass the path there, the relative path, uploads slash geocoded. That's how I'm naming this at the moment. Later I'll do something more advanced, so let's name it geocoded for now, .csv. And then what this will do, it will return a template, so it will return the index.html template. But then if you look here, let me open this to another view. Here we have a division. Note the Jinja2 syntax that I'm using there. So I'm including the btn variable, and I'm ignoring when that is missing. Now this is different from here, up here. Here I'm returning a HTML as a string, and here I'm returning an HTML template. So the syntax is different. And this is also different from when we use extend. So when we extending a layout, you extend a layout when you want that as soon as the user visits, let's say the index.html template, the index.html template will display other HTML templates. So it will extend as soon as the user visits that index.html page, so the home page. This is different because we don't want this to be displayed right away. That's why you're saying ignore missing, so ignore that when it's missing. And include it only when the user is visiting this success-table URL. And when the user visits that, so when the user presses submit after having submitted a file, then you want to render this download.html template. So what this contains is a button here. You want to generate a button there, which should be, choose file, submit. So yeah, you get this download file in there, and you also get the HTML table. So the data frame has an HTML table. So the first row, the second row, the first row, the second row. And yeah, that button now is attached to a reference, which suggests that when the user presses download, the URL for the Python download function will be visited. So we go here, and this URL of the download function will be visited. And now what we want to do when the user visits this URL is we want to return a sendFile method. Actually, this should be uploads geocoded.csv. So we want to send to the user the file that we generated up here earlier in this function. We want to send that to the user under the name yourfile.csv, and also as attachment true. You know this code from the previous lectures. And yeah, that's about the download.html template. And yeah, we're basically done. I mean, you can get away with this version of the program, and it will be almost excellent if you went this far. However, we may have some small problems with this. The problem would be, if you choose a file, a CSV file that doesn't have an address column inside, so a column named address, then what would happen is you'd be able to load that file as a data frame, and then when you try to create a new column in the data frame called coordinates, and then you try to access an existing column named address in the data frame, Python will throw an error and it will stop the application. That means when the user visits the success table URL, they will be shown an error page. And that is not very user-friendly, so what you might want to do instead is you may add some functionality here that checks if the data frame, if the CSV file entered by the user, so you want to read the file as a data frame, and then in the data frame check if you have an address column. If you have one, then you go ahead and do the calculations, but if you don't, then you return something to the user. So instead of returning df to HTML, you return a message saying that sorry, you don't have such a column in your CSV file. So yeah, I'll show you the code for that in the next lecture. So see you.